Hello, this is George Senda, the guy from Pittsburgh, the real official, one and only original authentic, the guy from Pittsburgh, except those substitutes or imposters or purveyors of fake news about the guy from Pittsburgh. And there's a lot of fake news out there. And the biggest purveyor of fake news is CNN. And one of the biggest purveyors of fake news is CNN's Don Lemon. Now, Rush Limbaugh calls himself America's truth defender, but every once in a while, Rush misses the ball. So I'm going to give you the truth about Don Lemon's comment that white men are the biggest terrorist threat in the country. Anybody can skew data to support your argument. The Pew Institute, Huffington Post, and other left-wing organizations all came out with these reports saying that white men, and they're referring to the white extremists, the Nazis, the neo-Nazis, anybody who is a member of a hate group, do more terrorism than anybody. But they admitted one big fact. They cut it off at 2008 and go to 2016. They ignore 2001 to 2016. So I'm going to tell you the truth. There was the Nation Institute Investigative Fund, cited on Huffington Post, statistics 2008 to 2016. But in a federal report in 2016, they have a list of terrorism events in the United States. 225 violent extremist terrorist events, many ending in death for the victims. Of those, 106 on the far right killed people. 119 radical Islamic terrorists killed people. And there were 3 years in the graph I found from 2000 to 2016. Most of the graphs, the far-right terrorists in the homegrown terrorism versus Islamic terrorism, including people who become American citizens, were dead even. In 2002 and 2009, Islamic terrorist was higher than homegrown extremists. In 2015, the far right was more than Islamists. But they don't break this down by race. They do break it down by country. And I'm going to read you the risk factor estimate. Now, according to one source, the number one risk factor, they've never performed a terrorist act. I have to do some more investigation. Number 1 is Somalia. Number 2 is Yemen. Number 3 is Saudi Arabia, and we know what they did on 9/11, and they funded that. 200 Americans died on 9/11. And then you have crazed congressman in Hawaii saying the U.S. Arizona Memorial is unnecessary. It's a bunch of rusting iron and should be removed. Well, that was another terrorist act, an undeclared act of war by the Japanese that killed over 2,000 Americans, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and civilians. But she doesn't want to recognize that fact. We were attacked without a declaration of war. But to continue, Uganda, Jordan, Algeria, Sierra Leone, Pakistan, Palestinians, I will not say Palestine because that is not a state, Albania, Iraq, Bosnia, Sudan, Kenya, other Asian countries, and you don't get to a country that's mostly white till Australia, number 25. Then you get Israel, number 30, the UK, 36, and Canada, 42. So the fact versus fiction here is the government's report does not break people down by race. It breaks them down by country. And they don't list the United States, but they do mention homegrown domestic terrorism. So by a small margin overall in those years, it's Islamist terrorism that outdoes far-right terrorists. Now, This is not to say that anyone who says they are a nationalist is a white nationalist. A nationalist is what we used to call a patriot, someone who loves the flag, the American anthem, our troops, our first responders, and the country as a whole, like President Trump does and like I do. There's a reason why this sits next to me, this flag, and it's got a piece of stuff on it, but I cherish this flag. It's a symbol. Doesn't mean everything's right in the United States, but it sure as hell doesn't mean everything's wrong like people on CNN say. And by the way, one other thing. The canard that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and they excoriated George Bush about that for years. Well, I used to watch CNN because at the time there was almost anything, only thing to watch, and we went into Iraq. They had a story that American ground forces and American special forces units and American chemical weapons units went into this warehouse in Iraq. They found depleted uranium. They found chemical weapons. They found all kinds of stuff in there, stockpiled, but stuff also scattered all over the floor. It was a mess. And those troops, after that movement into that building, got deathly ill, and some of them died, if I remember correctly. That was on CNN, where you had Wolf Blitzer talking about, the shock and doom, or whatever it was called, shock and awe. That story disappeared. You never heard it again. And for those who listen to Coast AM, you may remember that Ed Dames said that the chemical weapons that Saddam Hussein had were taken in Russian trucks, moved to Lebanon, and buried in the Bekaa Valley. That story has never been investigated either. There are stories all the time that show up on the news once, and then someone suppresses them. Like the story back in the 80s when Gene Roddenberry died. Well, the story on the Sacramento Channel 40 that came out just before that, scientists have discovered a way to stop you from being addicted to cigarettes, heroin, and alcohol. That was a news story. They mentioned the scientists, they mentioned the university. That story appeared once, never appeared again, you never heard anything about it. But for Don Lemon to say that these terrorists are right-wingers, that they're domestic terrorists, that they're white supremacists, is not necessarily true. And I know from personal knowledge that one person in the United States and his family, a friend of mine who lives in Washington State, was at a mall there when a foreign national who emigrated to the United States started to shoot up the mall and shot one of his relatives. And you may remember the Boston Marathon bombings, the pressure cooker bombings. Those guys were from Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan, one of those stands you can't pronounce. I had to tell my late mother, all the stands usually have nothing but Muslims in it. That's not against any Muslim, but they're predominantly Muslim, and they're the former republics of the Soviet Union. And you may remember Florida, a guy who was mad. He went after white people, black people, Asian people, and killed 50 of them. Las Vegas, a white guy, killed 50 people. He wasn't an Islamist. And San Bernardino, two Islamists blew up a meeting, a Christmas party. And the list goes on and on and on. But I will say one figure I found, more people have been killed by Islamists in this country than white nationalists or white supremacists. If you want to go back into history, probably more people were killed by white supremacists also in the South. They were called the Ku Klux Klan, founded by Nathan Bedford Forrest, former Confederate general, and Democrat. Yes, the Democratic Party founded and supported the Klan, and they're still Klan members today, but they are relatively ineffective. So don't believe the fake news when they take this much facts and don't tell you, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. And I'll be keeping an eye on Don Lemon, who hates Trump and apparently bundles all white people, all Caucasians, into one ball of wax and says the white man is the most dangerous threat to the U.S. I think the most dangerous threat to the U.S. that's not a terrorist is lying liberal news organizations, because they also engage in scare tactics. All right, this is George Senda, the guy from Pittsburgh. Have a great evening. Stay wet, warm, dry, or cool as the case may be, and above all, stay safe out there, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye for now.